Hey everyone, we are excited to launch the Bright Mind subscription. Unlimited access to all of our CE courses, webinars, and expert speakers all in one place.
And for a limited time for the month of December, you can get 50% off. Normally $299 a year, now just $149 for your first year.
That's unlimited CE on your schedule for half price.
Head over to psych2practice.com and click sign up, and the discount is already applied. We look forward to seeing you there. And as always, be well, stay psyched. This episode of the Psych to Practice podcast is sponsored by PAR, where psychological assessments meet innovation.
PAR has been the gold standard in the industry for over 45 years and has empowered professionals in education, healthcare, private practice, and research with trusted tools and cutting-edge solutions.
Discover more at parinc.com. Again, that is parinc.com. Creating connections, changing lives.
Welcome to the Psych to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm Ray Christner, your host, and this week I got to fly solo. Paul was not available this evening, so I had the chance to do an episode on school refusal behavior and had a chance to talk with Tom Brant, Elias, and Courtney Huguenin, who are all school psychologists who really have spent about the last 4 years kind of talking about this topic and have been doing great work in this area. And so I was glad to really bring them on. And, you know, in an hour, we really just got to scratch the surface on a really complex topic. But I think they provided great information to help understand things like the functions of the behaviors that result in school refusal behavior, and also really kind of ending about how we partner a little bit with families. So I think really good information, probably a topic we'll need to maybe dive deeper in the future here, but was great to have them on. Just to tell you a little bit about our three guests. Tom Brant is the Director of Pupil Personnel for Amity Regional School District Number 5 in Woodbridge, Connecticut. He currently serves on the NASP Board of Directors as the Northeast Delegate Representative. Elias is a school psychologist in Meridian, Connecticut. He was recently named the 2026 School Psychologist of the Year by the National Association of School Psychologists. He is also the past president of the Connecticut Association of School Psychologists. Also, Courtney Huguenin is a school psychologist at Conneaut Central School District in Bohemia, New York. She serves as the NASP delegate for New York and co-chair for the NASP Professional Communication Committee. Again, this was a great episode. Honor to have these three on who are truly friends and people I respect in the field of school psychology for all that they do to help families and kids. If you have thoughts on this episode, please join us on social media and give your thoughts, or also just share this episode. This is an issue that we are seeing more and more often working with kids. And again, hopefully some good resources for families. With that, enjoy the episode, School Refusal Behavior and Family Collaboration. So Courtney, Eric, and Tom, thank you so much for joining the Psych to Practice podcast with us tonight. So love having you on here to talk about school refusal behavior. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
So before we kind of get into the content, we like to kind of start every episode and kind of let our guests give a little bit of their origin story, how they got into mental health or psychology. So we just want to kind of hear a little bit from each of you. I guess, Courtney, maybe let's start with you. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into the field?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you the short version of it. So I actually started going to school for music education, I was a vocal music major. Yeah. So I think this kind of goes along with everyone's school psychology story that they didn't know was a thing until it was a thing. Right. And then I just did the old changing of the mind, and I went to school. I actually got my degree in undergrad in psychology and special education. Still wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So I got a master's in psychology and education from Teachers College. I got really into the forensics internship I was in, realized that could be cool. And then I was like, you know what? Time to get a job. So I was a special education teacher for a few years. And that's really where I, became exposed to the role of a school psychologist in my building. I was really interested in the assessment piece of it. And I decided, I just kind of wanted to dig a little deeper into really helping kids get ready to learn. So went back to school again, and here I am.
All right. So your exposure was on the job then to school psychology.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you hear bits and pieces in your teacher training back then. And I think I really saw, and now I realize that it's so much more than assessment, right? But that large piece of the work when I was on the job and I started, working with my students, and I was just really, I think, kind of inspired by the detective work of it. Sure. It's, we have kids that have difficulties, and how do we kind of get to the bottom of it and see what we can do? So I went to St. John's University, and I've been working in a high school on Long Island as a school psychologist. This is my 11th year.
Oh, wow. Great.
Yeah.
Tom, how about you? How did you get into the field?
Yeah. So, it was a beautiful windy day at, Penn State main campus out there in State College, beautiful things to look at out there in the middle of winter. And I realized that as a psychology major, you need to do something besides your undergrad degree. Those general degrees in psychology yield to many job opportunities. Sure. So while I was looking and comparing it, I was like, well, I kind of want to work in schools, but I don't think I can teach for 6.5 hours a day in front of students. Like, I just don't know if I have that in me. So I went and knocked on some person's door where it said school psychologist, back when Penn State had a very robust school psychology program. They're like, you should do school psychology. I was like, that sounds great. So once again, I have one of those amazing, highly motivated paths to school psychology. Ended up coming back home to Connecticut, going to Fairfield University for another great reason, that they had just laid fresh red mulch on the campus right before graduation. So I'm like, this is where I want to go to school. It has brand new red mulch. But spent 3 wonderful years at Fairfield, and now 17 years later, still in the field. Loving school psychology, but definitely it was that undergrad psych major route where, like, you have that aha moment that this major in general psychology is leading me directly to human resources. And I don't know if I want to do that the rest of my career. And I can't say I ever turned back. And although now defunct, I think it was because I knocked on that professor's door, at the State College campus, University Park for Penn State, and said, tell me how I can be in schools and not be in a classroom for 6.5 hours a day.
Yeah. Teaching's a whole other issue.
Yeah. God bless our teachers.
That's right. Absolutely. So, Eric, how about you?
Sure. Similarly, I think I came to school psychology through the back door as well. I was a social sciences undergrad major, and many of the people in that program went into social work, although we had a large, number of classes we had to take in sociology and psychology and in social work. That degree now at Roberts Wesleyan College is a BSW degree. At the time, it was a bachelor's in social sciences. So I thought I would probably go into social work in some way. I'd done an internship for the New York State Division for Youth as an undergrad, and started looking at social work and psychology master's degree programs. Wasn't thinking about doctoral level training. Was just sort of thinking, where do I go? And so I just started looking into everything, psychology, sociology, social work, and kind of, rolling the dice to see who would give me good scholarship money and financial aid and what the programs looked like. And lo and behold, the school psych master's and specialist program at Bucknell University opened up, and it was fully funded. And so they said, if you come here, we'll pay for it. And I said, I'll come there. And similarly, like I really didn't know exactly what school psychology was. It was sort of like, I know this is psychology. I know we work in schools. What's the difference between this and guidance counselor? I was asking all the same questions that people ask of us. And about 3 weeks into the program, I knew it was for me. And I was like, yeah, school psychology is the thing. I want to do this and really have loved it. And I graduated 36 years ago. So 1987 was my first year of graduate school, almost 40 years ago. So pretty amazing.
Well, and I'll share with our listeners before we get into the topic, you're now school psychology royalty, now that you are the 2026 School Psychologist of the Year for NASP. I think people should know that. So 37 years, but also some pretty important work and, knowing what you do. I was so glad to see you get honored for all that you've done for kids. So congratulations on that award.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So I guess maybe kind of before we talk about the details of the topic, I guess I'm curious, how did the three of you get together to start presenting and training people on working with school refusal behaviors?
Yeah. So, Tom and I, we came to know each other and same with Eric, through our state association work, me being in New York and Eric and Tom in Connecticut. So Tom kind of comes from the administrator perspective side of it. And I would often kind of run just some of my questions by him. Right. And, we'd get to talking about it. And it really, I want to say pre-2018, my district really tasked me with trying to kind of uncover some of these phenomenons of students having chronic attendance issues and, kind of looking at outplacements for that. Right. But really, if we're not attending one school, what's to say another one is going to be kind of the fix here? So I was often speaking with Tom about it, just kind of bouncing on ideas. And I was like, if it was becoming an issue with, students in his district as well. And we were kind of like, well, maybe we should learn more about this if we're going to try and figure it out. Right. So, and then I'm like, well, as long as we're learning about it, be great to kind of maybe help teach others about it as well, being it's an up and coming problem. And then we really kind of clued Eric in because, I have the high school perspective. Tom has he jokes about his administrator perspective, but we needed kind of that elementary piece. And who better than, as you said, school psych royalty, but, Mr. Eric Elias, as Tom always refers to him. And I think it was just one of those things where, again, it goes back to the detective work perspective of we have a problem. And while we learned all of the foundational behavioral strategies, interventions, in our graduate work, well, you get into the field and the problems become so specific and so particular, and then match those specific problems with the plethora of individual variables with all of our students, right? In our environments, we're tasked with figuring out, how to take our foundational training and really kind of solve the puzzle. So I think it became a thing of we have a problem, and it's not only going to help us be better school psychologists, practitioners, administrators, but it's going to help the kids that we're, working with day in and day out. Tom, Eric, I don't know if you have anything to add, but.
Yeah. And really to highlight connections and, taking the data we have, let's say, on that fateful day when I asked Eric to join us, I had promised him that this was going to be, we're just going to do a quick presentation proposal to NASP for 2022, kind of be like a one and done. We want to talk about school refusal. And now 4.5 years later, we've presented at 4 consecutive conventions and dozens upon dozens of other times. And every so often, Eric Elias reminds me, and he goes, remember when you said this was going to be a quick one presentation? It's all about connections and relationships, I'll say.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. This is a topic that you said you guys have been really kind of on this for a while. For a few years. We're seeing, at least in my area, this being kind of a much bigger topic where we have a lot of cases. I get a lot of referrals, I think, in my practice, and we hear from school districts all the time that this is one of the biggest challenges that they're facing. So, I think it's such a timely topic, and you're probably going to be presenting on it for years to come, for sure. But, I guess maybe for people who are listening. So when we're talking about school refusal behaviors, how do you all describe that? Like, what's kind of maybe can you give us a description or kind of a definition of when we use school refusal behaviors, what all does that include?
Yeah, I mean, we really, in kind of beginning our studies of this, we focus a lot on the work of Christopher Carney, and he defines it as a child motivated refusal to attend school or any type of difficulty remaining in class or being in school. I mean, the other piece really goes to what we're seeing. You know, I think as years have gone on, that kind of end game of, well, everyone wants to graduate, right? Like that's a thing, you know, that was just, I feel, accepted years ago that of course kids are going to graduate and then we're going to move on to the next step. We're really seeing that evolve now in the schools of we have to kind of figure out where that motivation is, right? And when we have students who are struggling with that motivation, or there's other environmental factors that are coming into play, it's how do we really take the function of it, right? That theoretical foundation, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit, and determine, you know, how we're going to get to the next step here of not only determining why we're having difficulty coming to school, remaining in school, but, you know, what is the end game here? What's the motivation? So I think we're seeing it as full day absences, tardies, but also a lot of that, this class, you know, is not for me. I'm not going to go to this class. So while it might look the same, the variables contributing to maintaining it appear to have become different even in the past 6 years or so.
I don't know what your all thoughts are on this, but I've seen that there's a lot of people that are kind of saying, well, we shouldn't call it school refusal because that's a behavior that we're hearing things like emotionally based school avoidance. And I guess from your experience is like part of my thoughts have been that maybe that narrows it too much when we just say that it's an emotional avoidance. But I guess what are your thoughts on when we hear some of these other terms? Does that seem like it matches or?
Yeah. I mean, I think as we've sort of gone down this rabbit hole of exploring the functions of school refusal behavior and the barriers to attendance, I think that's part of it. You know, we are part of what we're doing is sort of looking into, you know, what are the functions, which we'll probably talk a little more in depth about, but a lot of it has to do with there's an emotional, typically anxiety-based issue with attendance in a lot of kids' cases. And how do we then address that, right? How do we support the parents in helping the child? How do we support the child through exposure and response prevention kind of cognitive behavioral therapies and reinforcing the positive behavior, or then also not reinforcing that escape behavior? So I think at the heart of it is typically some anxiety. For many kids, we do also have kids who have some truancy issues who sort of want to skip and want to be home with friends and other things. So we'll get into sort of the four functions of school refusal behavior, I'm sure, as we get going. But yeah, I think a big part of that is that emotional response. And then how do we support the kids and then also build a safety net around them that doesn't overcompensate, but also provides the right level of support.
Yeah.
And now a word from our sponsor. PAR's AI Report Writer is an AI-boosted tool that generates comprehensive reports, including interpretations and recommendations based on scores from a wide range of popular assessment tools. Spend less time on report writing and more time supporting students. Learn more at parinc.com/AI. That is parinc.com/AI. And now back to our conversation.
Go ahead, Tom.
No, but in thinking about this, and this is some of our, recent expenditure and how we're looking at this and just what's coming out. And, Eric talked about this, sometimes being anxiety based. And, as we look to, change the names or how we're addressing it, are we inadvertently almost over accommodating by doing this? And taking away that, no one wants to feel uncomfortable, right? So we don't like the name school refusal. We don't like the name school avoidance. It sounds harsh, right? Like it's projecting an image. But then at the same time, are we being cognizant that the best way to address an anxiety-based emotion is sitting in that anxiety and moving forward in some of the different work coming out from various areas. So I'm always a little bit torn when we change some of the names and how we refer to stuff, because then it's that inadvertently or subconsciously changing how we're going to address it or the best research-based practice to it. So it's always this like, do we need to be more careful about our words, or do we need to be more direct in how we address it and worry less about the titles? We'll start many of our presentations saying that we are going to interchange school refusal, school avoidance, truancy, chronic absenteeism, lack of school engagement. I think we go down a list of 17 and say, if you see one of these 17 words up here, for the purposes of our presentations, while clinically different, they mean all the same thing, because we're really trying to almost get people past the label without minimizing that. Yeah, this is hard work. And sometimes you just got to sit in those really awkward, uncomfortable moments. And sometimes it's even with what we call it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think that, in my experience, I think probably a large majority of kids I've seen have had an anxiety base to it. But I think that to say that they all have is probably not accurate as well. I mean, I've had kids who, let's face it, it's just more fun being at home playing video games. Like, I mean, it's, that's the function. Like there's something better. And if I could get that instead, I'm going to do it. I think my opinion is we've kind of moved away from it being oppositional. And we are going to get to the functions. Like, I think just saying it's an oppositional behavior is pointless at times. But the fact that it's just anxiety, I've met some pretty calm kids who don't want to go to school. So I think we have to recognize that, I agree. Label doesn't necessarily matter, but the underneath, what's driving it. So before we get into those functions, though, I guess, so when we're talking about school refusal behaviors, how's that manifest at school, or what does it look like at school for people? So what are you guys seeing in kids when they're doing school refusal behaviors? Yeah,
maybe I can speak to the secondary, and Eric, if you want to jump in on, what you're seeing at the elementary level. Secondary, it's very interesting, right? Because we're talking about avoidance, but things that are more fun. So it's like, how can I avoid what I don't like or what's challenging to get to something more fun, right? Sure. So then we get our functions overlaying there quite a bit. Really, we're seeing, like I said, a lot of tardiness. And now, we're at a point where it's requesting to go to the nurse, or asking to go to the bathroom, and then taking, a 20-minute detour to the other end of the school building. So, I think there is a major misconception sometimes that students who are displaying school refusal behavior or have chronic attendance concerns are sitting at home in bed, playing video games all day. But we do, while those students are out there, we do have students who are in school, but they're not, fully engaged in the process, right? They're physically present, but they're, finding some other things to be part of throughout the school building. They might be absent on particular days. Phys ed is typically, can be difficult for students. Days when they know there's an assembly or a test, for example. We could go down the test anxiety rabbit hole, but that's a whole other conversation. Sure. But that's really, a lot of the behaviors we're seeing at the secondary level.
Yeah, Eric, how about elementary?
Sure. I think similarly, I see a lot of, especially my early elementary kids, preschool and into kindergarten, separation anxiety is a big deal. Kids who making that transition into the building is tough sometimes. But I also think, for typically with those kind of kiddos, once we get them into the building, they're usually okay. And we can work with, caregivers regarding distress tolerance and separation. But as our kids get older, we do see, as Courtney mentioned, going to the nurse a lot, or kids who perhaps are avoiding particular activities. And like we discussed, it's not always anxiety based. It may be, or not what we might think of as typically anxious behavior, but maybe some perfectionism. And if I'm struggling to do this perfectly and I don't get it perfect, maybe I don't want to be in that class today. Or perhaps sometimes just social connectedness. We sometimes put kids in situations where they're required to turn and talk or partner up or do things that require maybe some social skills that they might be lagging in or lacking. And sometimes that produces some frustration or difficulty. And kids may not want to be in that class, or so we see some of that avoidant behavior as well. In my experience with the younger kids, I see very little staying home and, playing video games, although occasionally I've run into kids being up all night watching television or on Discord, and mom and dad don't always know.
Right.
Trying to work with caregivers to tell them, I'm pretty sure Tommy said he's up all night watching stuff he shouldn't be watching. Right. We need to have these conversations.
Yeah, I'm so glad you all kind of broke that down, because I think sometimes when we hear a term like school refusal behavior, we are thinking of the kids who won't even leave their house. And we have those. I mean, I see those cases as well. But I think it's so important to recognize that they don't start there. I mean, it's, all of them have this kind of buildup that you all have kind of mentioned, where maybe it is just going to the nurse a lot, or going to the guidance counselor or school counselor, or whatever it may be, that there's these micro behaviors, maybe we'll call these smaller instances. And sometimes we ignore them or reinforce them. And then we end up seeing it kind of get to that point. And a lot of times when I work with schools, I always say, like, yeah, let's catch it at the nurse phase. Like, let's catch it there. It's a much easier intervention than when we can't get them out of the house. So, I mean, do you all see that same kind of buildup that kind of happens?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that buildup, and even the buildup of, it could start with having a tantrum in the morning, but still going to school, right? And sometimes those could be warning signs that, might look like a typical behavior from a child who has separation anxiety. But then before I'm never going to say it's too late, but it escalates so quickly that sometimes without, the education on the topic, the caregiver might not realize that this is actually, a precursor to something that could, really be exacerbated if the intervention is not early enough. And, you think about a school, so like a large middle school or a large high school, unless somebody is constantly monitoring that attendance. I mean, there will be a case where, I might have someone ask me a question and the student's been absent for, 20 days and it's already in the fall, but there's just maybe not enough staff to keep that close of an eye on every student. Right. So that's kind of how we see it.
Yeah. And Ray, I think you make a great point about starting at the nurse level, because from the district lens, like in my role and a central office administrator, what I'll see is like, we'll see these little trails starting, right? We'll see a couple absences here or there, but then we might have a legitimate medical experience. Student has to go out for a surgery, or there's a pre-planned family trip, or, a passing away of a loved one. But then all of a sudden the student isn't able to re-enter into the school environment. Like we saw these little, and then this is where we get into, and every state's a little bit different, but, especially Connecticut, we have homebound rules. And we sometimes see the inadvertent reinforcement of this because the student isn't coming to school, and it's, with lingering symptoms from the flu, or, we've kind of moved past the pandemic and some of the related, stuff that was with the COVID-19 pandemic, or, a concussion or something like that, where we're like, oh, okay, this is a legitimate medical excuse, but now we're beyond the expected recovery time. And now we're dealing with some anxiousness, some worriness. How am I going to get caught up? Or we see that schools might not have really good plans in getting students caught up. So the anxiety or the angst, I hate using the word anxiety because really it's not a true anxiety. It's an angst because we'd all be anxious if we missed work for 10 days and then we had to go in and no one was helping us catch up. And we have fully developed brains,
right.
So when we think about our younger students and our adolescents, so we see some of that where we kind of start tripping over and making some inadvertent mistakes. And then we take something that could have been started at the nurse level, but then it's moved its way up to, and now we're at something that looks like school avoidance, school refusal, but it's really based on a legitimate medical reason. And we have to scaffold that way back to help just reduce some, what I call really developmentally appropriate anxiety and angst about getting back into the natural routine based on a medical procedure or something like that. So sometimes we almost walk into it ourselves.
Yeah. So I guess kind of going off that. So we mentioned kind of COVID being a part of this, and I know that's exacerbated at least for a while. But are there Are there other barriers that you all see that kind of contribute to students attending school consistently?
Yeah, I think as Tom mentioned, that chronic acute illness can be huge, and not just for our student of concern, but perhaps siblings or parents. And so the child may be worried that something's going on with one of their siblings, or worried that, mom or dad has a diagnosis of something terminal or something very serious. So, and then we also have things like family responsibilities, and kids may be getting other kids up because caregivers are going to work. We have folks who have housing and food and transportation insecurity. So if, Tommy misses the bus, he's not going to get in. There's no way to get him to school. So access issues with that. And also access to perhaps other needed services or unpredictable schedules, lack of access to, technology that they might need. We have, certainly kids who've had impact of trauma, impact of violence, those kinds of things. So I would say any number of things can arise, with any child or any family that can be significantly impacting. And it's super important as we get into how we're sort of measuring and looking at school refusal, really getting good histories and good family backgrounds and, seeing what these variables are contributing or what variables are contributing.
School climate plays a huge role in this. If my school feels good to me and comfortable to me, it's a safe place, then I want to be there. Right. So if we have, situations where a child is struggling with learning and there aren't enough, academic interventions, that they can access, then, I'm not going to want to keep going if it's, continues to be difficult for me, which, just creates even more learning gaps in itself on top of the attendance problem. And we're also seeing just some misconceptions about attendance, that I've already missed so many days. I'm not going to get credit anyways. So why go the rest of the year? Or, well, it's an excused absence versus an unexcused. And I always say, okay, tell me the difference, because you're still not, accessing I always say, if anyone can find the difference, with that, besides having a medical note, they're going to win the lottery, because you're still not present for instruction or available for instruction. So I think a lot of aversion and misconceptions are also at play too.
Yeah, I agree. And I like that you mentioned the idea of like some of these other factors, because, we're going to move into the function. We keep teasing people that we're going to do this, but we have these kind of the school refusal piece, but I look at these other kind of maintaining things like, right, if you're academically behind or it's academically hard, that makes the intervention for, I think, the school refusal behavior that much more if we don't also solve that kind of that area. So yeah, I appreciate that you guys kind of look at this holistic piece, and I know we're going to kind of get into those details. But let's since we've mentioned function 5 times and we haven't told people what those are, let's move into that. So how do we determine the function of school refusal behavior, and what are the functions? What are the things we see most common?
So we joke in our presentations that this is our WTF moment. What's the function? That trying to figure out what those 4 functions are. Typically, I cover the first 2 and Courtney covers the second 2. So I don't know, Tom, jump in wherever you want to. But the first 2 are typically, we're looking at the 4 functional profiles. And again, this is based on the work of Chris Kearney. And so the first 2 are based on negative reinforcement. So avoiding, escaping something that's aversive. So function number 1 is avoiding general school-related stress or anxiety. So I'm coming to school and I don't like whatever's going on. Maybe my teacher yelled at me yesterday. Maybe I'm struggling to separate from mom or dad or caregiver, or I'm in a different living situation and that's stressful. So coming to school is hard for me. And that I typically, for me in the elementary school, are my younger kiddos. That's typically what I see with my younger kiddos who are having some school refusal concerns, though it can happen across the spectrum, certainly. And then the second function is escaping or avoiding some social situation. So we might have my first function kiddos who are just stressed about school or not enjoying school or anxious about school itself. And then my function 2 kiddos who are socially anxious and are stressed about some sort of social situation happening in school, whether it's bullying or perfectionism about class or, peers. They're super worried about something that's going on more socially rather than just related to attending school itself. Courtney, I don't know if you want to jump in with the other 2 functions here.
Sure. Yeah. So the other 2 they show that positive reinforcement, right? So we're trying to pursue something here. So number 3, generally see it in the younger students, elementary age as well. That is pursuing attention. We say from significant others, because it could be a caregiver, it could be someone else at home. These are students who they might be fine going to school. I always say, like, back in the day when your parent was allowed to walk into the school building with you, right? Like, they might be totally fine doing that, not a care in the world as long as their favorite person is with them. They might not have that anxiety in school, right? These are students who may get in trouble at school because they know, well, my caregiver, mom or dad, or my favorite aunt is going to pick me up, right? I kind of will get what I want. And these are also students who they might miss the whole day at school. I think we're seeing this phenomenon even more now that parents and caregivers are working from home, right? So they know somebody's at home so they can spend time with them. They might miss the whole day, or maybe it'll be a lot of attention-seeking behaviors in the morning, or like that kind of negotiation and battle getting ready for school, and then they end up going. This one, you're going to see slightly more non-compliant behavior than with our anxious students. They might be calling home, texting home to get picked up. When we get to function 4, and Ray, this was really, you kind of hit the nail on the head with this one earlier with, finding something that's more fun, right? So with number 4, we're pursuing tangibles. So we're going to see this in our middle school students, our high school students. Again, not really necessarily anxious about the school environment. They could be bored at school, but really they're trying to get something outside of the school setting. So this could be access to, gaming, being able to use their smartphone. Maybe it's what I'm labeling as risky activities, right? So maybe socialization outside the school setting. And also what's come up, the past few years, just based on my experiences doing this, is like being able to be in bed and sleeping has become a tangible, right? So you're going to have a real hard time falling asleep in class because hopefully someone's going to wake you up all the time, right? But that is really, something that we're starting to see.
And I'm going to kind of put you all on the spot here about this, since you can say you don't want to answer, but no, I guess I'm curious, and I kind of have my thoughts on this, but since COVID, we've seen much more virtual education and virtual opportunities, and I could see them as being viable for some people. My concern has been, how do these reinforce those functions that you talked about? Like, so if you have social anxiety, by doing virtual learning, we escape that and maybe make that anxiety stronger. Or if we want to sleep in, we reinforce that and it gives the opportunity. But I guess, what are your thoughts? I mean, is that something that creates just another challenge for us in being able to help kids? And my concern is not the immediate, but does that reinforce a behavior that might lead to greater difficulties down the line? And your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and you can almost understand it to an extent because we become such a virtual society. Like, even the nature of this podcast that we're conducting now, we're not sitting in the same studio, at a 6-foot conference table. We're virtually from 3 different states, same time zone, but 3 different states. Yeah. So, when we look at our adolescents, our younger children who, we still know that social learning theory is one of the most important ways we all learn in life. Yeah. And when parents now are given the ability to work from home, or they have virtual flexibilities with their work or reduced days in the office, and you're a student and you're like, I need to come to school 5 days a week, 32.5 hours, but my caregiver, my mom, my dad, my grandpa, my aunt, my uncle doesn't need to. That's tough, right? Or they don't need to, the caregiver's no longer waking up in the morning to leave. So now the student's on their own to wake up to leave the house. Or when we do get them to school and we're, sitting through those anxious moments and helping them fight through whatever kept them from going to school, knowing that their caregiver is home and can come pick them up is a way of a subconscious reinforcer, because there's the escape, right? The escape's there. I can send an email if I'm in a state with a cell phone banned, or I can sneak off and make a phone call. And then it's added this layer that, pre-COVID, we didn't have this nearly as much as this virtual options for so much different employment routes. So now I think, there is definitely a sect of our students who are like, well, if my caregiver doesn't have to come to school or go to work, why do I need to go to school then? And then when we do get them to school, there's that outlet. There's that escape feature that kind of enhances it. So, one of the things we talk about in the presentation is that the functions, while they're really nice, we say there's 4 functions and there's nice linear divides between them. There's not. The kid's like on a little hamster wheel, or the student's on the hamster wheel, hitting a little bit of function 1 one day, and then like, let me dabble in 4 over here. And then, hey, I'm going to throw a little 3 at you right now. So it's this thing of like, all right, where are we seeing the majority of their behaviors? And it's really kind of led us into, how do we support the caregivers in this and their role so that they have the adequate training, which is required by law, to support, students and their, whomever it may be, whether it's their child or, a significant other's child, in getting to school. Because I think that as a society now, this virtual opportunities has created no research behind this saying a 5th function of, hey, the person I spend my nights with doesn't have to wake up and go to their work. Why do I need to wake up and go to school? Well,
and the other piece of that too is a lot of times these children are going to school to complete their work on a device, right? So, and it's a little counterintuitive, because if I can do this at home, then, I have to go to another building, so just adds to it.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I think, it's, as you guys were talking, I was thinking, school refusals, not new. In my 30 years of doing this, I had cases my first year. But I think, going back to something you said, Tom, is that I think the purity of the function has changed, where I remember cases being much more pure in function, but kind of going off of this idea of kind of the virtual learning, maybe that becomes an accommodation for someone who has social anxiety. But then that gets reinforced even further when now they can sleep till 10 o'clock, and some of them get their work done and they can start playing video games at 2 o'clock. And then now all of a sudden we layer other functions on top. And then when we're trying to intervene and help kids kind of move past this, now it's not this clear, like, oh, there's this one function, let's do this single intervention. It tends to be much more holistic. At least that's been my experience. Sounds like you guys have had something similar.
Yeah, I think you really hit it. And one of the things that, as we, I support my team in my district, or we just, do some consultative work, is really talking about, if the student can miss 80 days and still receive an A, guess what? I'm not coming to school either. Mm-hmm. So we've talked a lot about, like, and Courtney mentioned at the beginning, the climate that wants to bring in students, but where's that mix of academic rigor or academic engagement that makes the school? We know school's never going to be the most desirable place. We know that. Like, that used to be the old running joke, and, school refusal and addressing it, right? Make school more reinforcing than home. Well, that's really hard to do, right? And we know that. But, we have to also validate, especially our adolescent students who have, difficulties attending school. Yeah, I understand. You missed Mr. Brant's class 70 times and you're getting a B+. I understand why you don't think you need to come, but X, Y, and Z. So I think there are a couple of these things that now have started to, to your words, right, layer on top of each other a little bit more than they used to. Yeah. Previously, with the access to one-to-one devices and, Google Classrooms or Schoology or whatever it is, you can miss school and be completely current as a student right now. And I think that is something that, educationally we have to start to pay a little bit more attention to as we start to support students and their families and their engagement with academics.
So we kind of hit on the functions. I guess, are there interventions that align with the functions? Like, so as for those who are listening, I guess, what do we do? Like, so we identify these functions. Are there strategies or interventions that you all find kind of effective with these?
Yeah, I think definitely when we look at these functions through a sort of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement lens, addressing it from that perspective, I have kids who the two functions that I mentioned, the negative reinforcement, social anxiety and school anxiety, really, I think starting with distress tolerance, I think for all of us as parents and caregivers, if we have kids or certainly as we have working with kids, we want those kids to be supported, right? We want them to feel good. And so when they're distressed, we might come to their rescue a little earlier than we should have in some instances. So really understanding the dynamics of distress tolerance, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable doing things like, I call it a bravery ladder. When we're getting the kids into school, each rung of that ladder is stepping foot in the building, maybe getting to Mr. Elias's office, maybe then spending 15 minutes in class, then a half hour in class. And each rung then requires a level of support. So how much support should we be giving that child, and how much, reinforcement do they need at each step? Teaching them coping skills, breathing techniques, grounding techniques, cognitive behavior therapy. We have a number of interesting little models to deal with anxiety, the fear model, the STOP model, the SUDS model. They can all, we can Google all those, but they all have ideas for supporting the distressed student and then also helping out, how to support them as caregivers. And I think good cognitive behavior therapy, ACT therapy, those models work really well with addressing anxiety and reducing anxiety for kiddos.
So just to kind of make sure I'm kind of getting it, is that, it sounds like at the root of all of those different things, the goal is that distress tolerance, though, how they can sit with that desire to want to avoid or to escape and to be in that moment and realize that they can get through it. That's kind of the heart that we're trying to get to there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
When we get into, I'll go on to the third function. So pursuing attention, a lot of things, this is a tricky one, right? Because a lot of the interventions and strategies have to do with working with the caregiver and the caregiver's interactions with the student, with their child. So a lot of this is setting up, evening and morning routines with, kind of what's going on at each step. Maybe this is always like a tricky part when we present, because I'm saying a reward could be spending time together, but you should hopefully want to spend time with your child. But maybe it's, doing a special activity together, So maybe something, a little, if you're typically, cooking dinner together, maybe the child can decide what they want to cook, something special. This has a lot to do with language too, restructuring those directives, making them short and sweet, neutral and common tone. I mean, we're talking about a child who is going to try to do some negotiations at this point, right, to stay home. So repeating the expectation and not, Eric always mentions, like, don't promise you're going to buy your child an Xbox because they went to school this one day, right? You can't promise the world, keep it feasible here. So a lot of it is working with the caregiver, and then at school, check in, check out is great, giving attention for that desired behavior and downplaying or ignoring those interfering behaviors, reinforcement systems at school, but also, having a procedure if the child does want to contact home. You might have a situation where a child is calling or emailing their caregiver and, maybe working that out with the caregiver that don't go back and forth with them, remind them that they can see Miss Huguenin or Mr. Elias or Mr. Brant to talk. So having that procedure set up when we go ahead.
No. So I just on this end, it really sounds like the interventions are environmental, right? So, I mean, it's getting those routines. So if sleeping till 10 is something that's reinforcing it, we should have a routine to start your day earlier. So working with caregivers around that. And then that check in, check out almost kind of, I think, felt like it goes back to that climate issue, right? Having a good connection with somebody there. So that those are, or you were going to say something else. I interrupted.
Yeah, just knowing who that trusted adult is. I've had check in, check out with a cafeteria staff before because that's who that, student had a connection with. And I mean, I get it. I would be connected to who's serving me food too. You know what I mean? Like it's that it doesn't have to be, you as the school psychologist is who does that, who's the person who's kind of reinforcing for that child. And I think you mentioned the morning routine, then I think emphasizing to the family that the evening routine is just as important. And I think that's often overlooked, but a lot of these strategies are, let's set you up for success and remove some of the excuses of, I don't have anything to wear right now. Well, we already had that conversation and you picked out your clothes, but making sure that evening routine is set up as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think even, just to acknowledge, we kind of make that sound easy, but it's tough.
For sure.
It's tough. I mean, I tell parents like, it's not working day one. Like, just know, like there's resistance to that change and to create those routines, but it does get better and it takes time. And sometimes setting those routines maybe creates a worse behavior initially and we ride the wave, but the routines do work over time. I want to jump back. I was thinking when you were talking about like a child wanting to call, it's so interesting because that's such a different dynamic now. Like, so I'm old, like I went to school a long time ago and I was thinking like my parents both worked jobs that if I was sick throwing up, it would have still taken 6 hours to get a hold of them on their job to come in. Right. And now if a parent doesn't respond in 15 minutes, we're kind of freaking out. Like, it's kind of like, they didn't respond to the text. I said, so it's interesting. Like, I mean, this is a whole other episode, but how technology even plays into this, right? Like, I mean, it's our expectation that, our parents are available whenever we want to get a hold of them. That was not my lived experience. It was kind of like, like, they get off at 4. That's when you're going to talk to them. Like, unless it was life or death. So it's just a different dynamic in today's world for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, right. It wasn't my lived experience either. So, but I think that's something, that we need to sit with as school staff and practitioners also. I mean, you're right. There's been times when it has not been an emergency, but I will go down the list of numbers because there's just this giant assumption that people are accessible at all times. Yeah. So I think that definitely Tom talked about social learning earlier. If our students are seeing us behave that way when we're trying to get a hold of someone, and we have to validate that they're going to have the same expectations as well. Yeah. So.
Absolutely.
I will say, I don't know if you want to, I can touch on the fourth function too, just some strategies there. This is a big supervision one. I will say you'll see strategies in schools of the very distasteful feeling of being escorted from class to class, right? So in the secondary building, that is not typically something that a student would like, but I would say another key thing here is that frequent attendance monitoring, and also get to know your child and your student. If they're not in school or if they're not in algebra, where are their go-to locations where you can quickly find them and support them in returning to the place that they need to be in.
Yeah, I think that we don't think about those strategies, those supervision pieces. That's a good one as well. I'm curious, as we're talking about interventions and strategies for the kids, and you mentioned about caregivers getting involved, but I guess I'm curious from you all, like, how do we collaborate in these cases better with caregivers or maybe even outside providers as well? But I think this isn't just a school intervention. This really is a collaborative partnership with families. And what have you found successful to collaborate with families?
Yeah, when I think about this, and Ray, I appreciate you bringing up community providers too as well. Really, we're talking about the whole child here. And schools, while we have a child for 6.5 to 7 hours a day, this is really an intense and a high level, acute behavior, emotionality, whatever it may be, that we're trying to address. And it really requires a true wraparound approach. Mm-hmm. If everyone's not working together with the same goal and the same treatment plan in mind. So stressing that, our students who are engaging in school refusal, we need to have them in touch with a good therapist or a community-based provider who also understands that excusing absences and over accommodating isn't going to be our ways to success. It's on us as the school-based mental health providers to make sure that we're doing some psychoeducation with our community providers if they don't have that background, and then extending that to working with our families. And it's very much like the best practices approach for special education. We have to be very explicit and provide direct instructions to our parents so that they know they're part of the solution and they're not the reason or the cause for this. Oftentimes, we're seeing in research and hearing from parents that they're feeling blamed as it's their fault that their child or the caregiver's fault that their child is not attending school. And this isn't about blame. This is really about what can we all do together to work together. So first and foremost, letting the caregiver know that they're part of the solution. They're not part of the problem. Mm-hmm. We're not here to place blame on them. We're here to work together with how they can get to school. Often I give an analogy. Being in Connecticut, we have, 2 major highways. They transit most of the U.S. They go, basically across the state. They can get you to the same spot. We might just have 2 ways of getting there, but we both want the ultimate outcome with having your child to attend school and helping the parent really feel empowered and being very intentional with our non-judgmental language through this process, using we statements as opposed to I statements, bringing them to the table. When we're creating plans, it's not up to the school to create those plans in isolation. We really need to be bringing them to the table as an equal member. And I think that's some of the areas where schools, sometimes not volitionally, fall short. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, we often gloss over the IDEA, the law of our land within terms of special education requires that if these students are in special ed, we need to be training the parent and the caregiver in the student attendance or behavioral intervention plan that we've developed so that they have the skill sets in the home to get the student there. And I think sometimes, we try our best, but we leave out some of those important linkages that can really make a difference in a wraparound approach. And, Eric brings up and talks a lot about some cultural, considerations that often we miss.
Yeah, Eric, you want to share a little bit about some of those?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's important for us to recognize not all of our students look like us, right? And not all of our students come from the same cultural background and language background. And so it's important to be respectful. And we use terms like cultural humility, which to me means asking more questions than making assumptions, right? I want to know what the parents' concerns are, what their needs are, do they have things that are of value to them in their culture that I'm overlooking that are a strength as well. And, and sometimes we have folks who have, of course, different religions and religious holidays and, being aware of, oh, your son took a particular religious holiday off. Okay, let's work around that, right? I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to, to work with you and respect your culture and try to just support your child.
Yeah, I think that's so important. The idea of partnering with families. And I appreciate you guys sharing about the idea that, the we piece of this and getting families to not think, that we're going to just solve it alone in schools or as clinicians. It really is a much broader piece, and things that probably do a whole episode on ways to work with parents specifically, because I think that's such an important piece. Parents I work with, they feel guilt and shame sometimes that they should be able to get their kids to school, and moving past that, I think that is important. So appreciate you sharing those pieces. Well, yeah, I've kind of kept you guys here almost an hour. I don't want to take more of your time, but as we're kind of wrapping up, we like to ask our guests a couple ending questions. And First one I'm going to have each of you answer is if you could share a piece of content, can be anything, movie, book, whatever that you think people should check out. Doesn't have to be related to the topic, just things that you find interesting that people could explore on their own. What's something you'd share? And I guess, Tom, maybe we'll put you on the spot first.
So highly promote to all my graduate students that we need to be critical consumers within our field, and that especially within our field, there's a lot of capitalism and stuff being done. And our job is to be research-based scientists at all times. So I highly encourage everyone to listen to the Soul to Story podcast regarding literacy and literacy instruction, as it really drives home. It's a great, I think, 6 episodes, but it really shows how it's our job to be critical consumers at all times. So whether it's listening to, Eric, Courtney, and I talk about school refusal and doing, some fact checking, whatever it may be, but really being critical consumers of information. That really came to me, 2-3 years ago when I first listened to those series of episodes and saying, wow, just because something's out there doesn't mean it's the truth. So as, President Reagan once said, trust but verify.
There you go. Eric, how about you?
Yeah. First, I have to give a shout out to when you referenced Charles Barrett and his saying Home Alone. I thought that was brilliant. What a fun movie, but also one that emphasizes resiliency, right?
That's
working
right.
through adversity. But, I am a huge fan of Dr. Ross Greene, and I love the philosophy of kids do well if they can. And so a big part of what I think is important is for us to try to help get kids to that place where they can do well and support them in what they need.
Great. And Courtney?
I have to go back to the Rita Pearson TED Talk, Every Kid Needs a Champion. I know it's not like a series or anything. Yeah. It's one video, but I just think it highlights, this is for any educator, anyone working with children, just the power of relationships. I feel like most people in education have seen it. If you haven't, it just, it really is the crux of everything we do. And it just kind of serves as the foundation for all of our work and how to, help kids succeed no matter what they're experiencing in life.
Yeah, great. I haven't watched that in a while, but that excellent one. So the last question, and I guess, we always ask for 3 takeaways. Since we have the 3 of you here, we'll ask each of you for one. If you could kind of one takeaway that you want people who are listening to walk away with from today's episode, what's your takeaway? Eric, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. I think the big thing that I would want people to remember is that working through these kinds of things takes time and patience. Don't expect that we're going to throw a whole bunch of, I like to call them random acts of intervention, a whole bunch of things at the wall and see what sticks, and then expect it to get better, right? We have to work with the students, with the families, and it takes time. So be patient. Give yourself grace. We don't expect that, don't feel like a failure if it doesn't work tomorrow. Eventually things get better, but be patient. Be patient with yourself, be patient with the students, be patient with the family.
Great. Courtney.
Yeah, I talked about this a little just in the beginning. We have so much great foundational training. So it's when you are approaching the subject, use the foundational training that you have, given all the variables that interfere. Like, we talked about not having those nice linear categorical functions and how they overlap. You have to think outside of the box with this. We didn't go into the assessment piece as much, but if we had, I think you would see the emphasis we have on in-depth interviews, and Eric mentioned histories. You really have to dig deep, and with the strategies, get creative, but also stick to, the evidence-based practices that are appropriate for the functions.
And Tom?
I'm going to end it the way I end all of our presentations. School refusals where effort and outcomes don't always match, but yet we still keep showing up despite it, which is exactly why this is the most important work we do in our field right now. And I truly believe this. We're really good at crisis intervention. We're really good at threat assessments. We don't always see these results. We don't, because effort and outcome is not always going to lead us to the same match, but it's the most important work we're doing because students who attend school have better long-term outcomes than students who don't.
Well, that's a great ending message. And, Courtney, Eric, Tom, again, thanks so much for joining me tonight and joining us on Psych to Practice for this episode about school refusal behaviors. If our listeners are interested in learning more about you or if they can follow you, where's the best place for them to follow your work?
For me, I do have two things. I have a website called randomactsofcounseling.com where I talk about behavior-based, data-based interventions. And then I also have a school psych social media page, and that is Eric Elias, school psychologist on Facebook. And
I want to just give a shout out to your podcast.
Yes, thank you. School Psyched Podcast. And we have social media pages as well, Instagram, Facebook, and we have a WordPress page as well, School Psyched Podcast. Thank you.
I'll go. I'm a simple girl. You can find me on LinkedIn. So that's it.
Nice and easy.
Nice and easy.
Also really simple. You can find me right on LinkedIn. And just one more plug for Eric Elias. We've been now presenting with this man for 4 years. And every single time I learned something new about him and had no clue he had a website of Random Acts of Counseling. I hear a new story every night. Learn something new. Like, to all of our listeners, this is Eric Elias. He is a box of chocolates and you just never know what you're going to get at any given time.
No presentation is ever the same when you have Eric in it.
That's right. That's why he's school psychology royalty.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you are a licensed clinician who would like to use this information, please head over to www.psychtopractice.com or check out show notes for a link to purchase an accompanying exam for continuing education units for this episode. If you're interested in hearing more or staying up to date with what's going on with Psych to Practice, you can visit our website or follow us on all major social media by searching Psych to Practice. We will be back in 2 weeks, but until then, be well, stay psyched.